Well, this morning, my phone alerted me to news from 88-year-old Iowa Republican Senator Chuck Grassley. 88 years old, you think maybe he's stepping down. No, nor is he retiring at the end of his term. He announced his re-election campaign in a tweet. Here's the tweet. It's 4 a.m. in Iowa, so I'm running. I do that 6 days a week before I start the day. I want you to know what Barbara and I have decided. I'm running for re-election. A lot more to do for Iowa. The 88-year-old has held the seat for 40 years, since 1981, before I was born. If he wins, this will be his 8th term, and he would be 95 when it ends. Hard to leave a cushy job, perhaps. Our representatives work far less than the average American. The 117th Congress, convened on January 3rd, will conclude on January 3rd of 2023. In those 2 years, the House is scheduled to meet for 160 days, the Senate 158 days. Congressional leaders have done little to change this, even though the public would support it. 86% of Americans polled believe term limits should be set. Most believe it would improve performance and prevent corruption. But our congressional leaders have little or no interest in imposing these for themselves. Francis Rooney, former ambassador to the Vatican, former Florida congressman who term limited himself and retired after just 4 years, joins us now. All right, do we need age limits, term limits, or both, sir?
Well, we definitely need term limits. I mean, Senator Grassley is a great American and a great patriot, but he's been there a long time. There are 340 million Americans. I'm sure that there's a lot of people that could serve our country well, not to take anything away from him. But term limits are what I think the founders envisioned, okay? They envisioned the servant leader comes off of his farm or his business, serve for a while, and go back to it, not a career as a professional politician.
Is the reason, and you're a student of history from Georgetown University, among other places, written on history as well. Is the reason the founders didn't put in term limits is because they couldn't imagine the idea of a professional political class, or they didn't think it was going to happen? What's the reasoning?
I don't think they would have ever imagined that anyone would want to leave their entire life behind to go serve in the public realm forever. And they just wasn't considered part of their ethos. I mean, they had to beg Jefferson to come back off his farm. Adams did several different jobs, but didn't do the same jobs. And I don't think anybody would have imagined that they would find entrenched politicians or the so-called political class. Since we fought a revolution, they fought a revolution, quite frankly, to get rid of a political class in England.
You're a businessman in addition to former congressman and former ambassador. If 86% of your customers want something, why is it that congressional leadership seems so opposed to giving it to them?
Well, in a normal economic environment, that's what you would do. If your customers want something, you're going to figure out how to give it to them and add value. Otherwise, you're going to go out of business. But in politics, it's totally different. This elected business is a real racket. Between the media appearances that you create a persona for yourself, between the mail that the federal government pays for you to send out, between these ridiculous messaging bills that makes people think you're really doing something, you can create you can market your voters with their own money. It's a real racket.
It's interesting. You think about it, it's not just Republicans that you've talked about, or Chairman Grassley, but on the Democratic side, the combined age of the top 3 Democrats in the House, Pelosi, Hoyer, and Clyburn, 244 years old, which is as old as Congress itself. And the big problem with term limits is that they're unconstitutional. You need a constitutional amendment. That's awfully difficult to do. You had a bill that would have effectively term limited people by turning everybody's salary to $1 after 12 years in Congress, but leadership didn't like that, did they?
They did not at all. In fact, there were over 100 sponsors of term limit bills that required a constitutional amendment, which is just a joke and was going nowhere. And I had trouble scrounging up about 20 for my bill.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because they want to stay there. Look at all the people that have renounced their term limits pledge after they've been there 6 or 8 years.
Yeah. Congress saying one thing and doing another. You just never think that would happen in Washington.
Well, you think some guy that grew up in rural eastern Oklahoma or southern Missouri lives in D.C. for 8 or 10 years, wants to go back there and pick strawberries?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a very good point. Mr. Ambassador, it's always good to see you, sir. My best to your wife.
Thank you, Leland. Look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time on a Friday night.